You'll notice, though, that at first it has a nucleus and mitochondria. And you might think, wait, I don't remember mitochondria being inside chloroplasts ever, and that's true. So we have some things happening. All the lineages that we know of, at least, the chloroplasts that came from secondary endosymbiosis have lost the mitochondria inside of the now chloroplast. So many of the chloroplasts inside lineages that came from secondary endosymbiosis have 4 membranes around their chloroplasts. Remember, they would have lost this mitochondrion, but they'd have 1, 2, 3, 4. Some groups now have 3, so they've lost one of those membranes over time. But we definitely see more than just the 2 membranes we'd see in something like plants or green algae or red algae, because those came from only one engulfing event. We have 1 membrane on the outside, and remember, this is a cut through of the cell. Really, all these are completely surrounding the entire chloroplast, and they're kind of nested within each other. So the first one here, the reason I've highlighted it in yellow is because it comes from the secondary host cell membrane. So when that cell engulfed the alga, it surrounds it with the membrane and pinches it in. And so that's what this cell membrane is here. So that's the outer layer. The second membrane here comes from the red or green alga plasma membrane. So essentially this part of the alga. That actually came from this, which is the primary eukaryotic host cell. So that's the plasma membrane of that primary eukaryotic host cell, because ultimately that turns into the plasma membrane of the alga, and then that is engulfed and turns into the second layer here. The third layer is from the primary eukaryotic host cell vacuole membrane. So essentially, when the primary eukaryotic host cell took in the cyanobacterium, it pinched around it, and that's what created this third membrane in the previous primary endosymbiosis events. And then this little membrane number 4 on the inside is from the actual initial cyanobacterium. Most chloroplasts lose the nucleus that's inside the chloroplast, but a few lineages retain it, and that nucleus is now what we call a nucleomorph. Morph means form, so it's a form of the nucleus essentially. The 2 groups that have nucleomorphs are the cryptomonads and the chlorarachniophytes. Cryptomonads came from engulfing a red alga, and chlorarachniophytes came from engulfing a green alga. So it gives us an example of both. And if we look at this picture here from a figure, we can see that this is the chloroplast, the whole thing. You've got mitochondrial genes inside the single-celled chlorarachniophyte alga. So it's got its mitochondrial genes. Those came from the secondary host cell, the nucleus from the secondary host cell. So you can see actually inside the chloroplast, there's a little nucleus remnant. It has some genes in it still. The same with the chlorarachniophytes. They've got a nucleus inside their chloroplast, but also a nucleus inside the cytoplasm like normal. It's showing us that this chloroplast came from an organism that had its own nucleus, which was the red alga in this case, or the green alga in this case. The groups that result from secondary endosymbiosis, I mentioned they're the non-archeplastid lineages. We can even say non-archeplastid photoautotrophic eukaryotic groups. Essentially, they're the ones with chloroplasts that are not glaucophytes, red algae, green algae, or land plants. So the ones who got it from red alga being engulfed, that turned into the chloroplast, are diatoms, brown algae, and those are both in the Straminopyle group, are dinoflagellates, some of which have lost the chloroplast entirely, some of which have non-functional chloroplasts. It's a little unclear whether everybody in dinoflagellates came from a lineage that had engulfed the red algae or just some of the groups there. And then we have the haptophytes, the coccolithophores, for example, within the haptophytes, came from a red alga being engulfed, and the cryptomonads, and that's what I just mentioned with having actually the nucleomorph. Most of these probably came from independent secondary endosymbiosis events. So you can actually see that, it happened multiple times throughout history of life. And then the green alga, we have evidence of that being engulfed and turning into the chloroplast in the eugleniid lineage, and as I mentioned with the nucleomorph, the chlorarachnia phyte lineage.